have all of the pieces in my head, but then all of this is no, I don't. Don't close down and just like wait for that. No.
We might have some latecomers sort of slotting in, but if you guys want to kick off, then we can do that. I'm just going to play around with the audio just for 2 secs. Okay. Well, if you speak into the microphone.
Hello. Testing. Oh yeah, that's what you say. testing. Is that good? Do you need it?
Yeah.
Yeah?
You're good.
That's all good?
Yep.
So you happy for us to start?
You are a go.
We're live? Oh my god. Okay. Thank you so much. Hi everyone. Welcome to Lighthouse Books. My name is Anahit. I'm a writer and editor based here in Edinburgh. And I'm so excited to be talking to Elle Nash today. The author of the amazing Nudes, which I have the proof, but the actual copy is so pretty. She's so cute. I love her.
Thank you.
So Elle is the author of Nudes and also the novel Animals Eat Each Other, which is also out with 404 Inc. And I'm 80% of the way through and having the best time.
Thank you.
Her short stories and essays have appeared in Guernica, The Nervous Breakdown, Literary Hub, The Fanzine, Volume 1 Brooklyn, New York Tyrant, and elsewhere. She's a founding editor of Witchcraft Magazine and a fiction editor at Hobart Pulp. Join me in saying hi to Elle.
Thanks for having me.
So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to do like a short reading and then we'll have like a wee chat and then there will be time for audience questions at the end. So there'll be some online, some hopefully from you guys. So we'll leave like 15-20 minutes at the end, so get thinking. But first of all, you're going to do a wee reading?
I am. I couldn't decide what to read, so I figured I would ask the audience, do you want me to read something about heartbreak or babies?
Heartbreak.
Okay. Actually, they're both about heartbreak, so. All right. But I will read the one that I actually said was going to be about heartbreak. I'm with money you want to take away my wife. He does angel dust in Brooklyn sex clubs, has a job that allows him to commute and fuck in the city. He has an array of stylish tattoos. I'm married, unemployed, and afraid to eat toast. We are the same. All my boyfriends have been influencers, but I don't need the women I date to provide for me. Investing in people means eventually exploiting them. Playboy was last active 5 hours ago. It's 3:32 a.m. I wonder if he's with E, which he probably is. I wonder if they've had sex before falling asleep. They are both fire signs. All fights in marriage come down to power. Of course they've had sex. 2 weeks later, I sit on the bed, lotioning my legs, listening to the TV in the living room. E is watching Law and Order. It's her favorite show. She's watched the series at least 5 times all the way through since we've been married. Olivia Benson murmurs on the screen, the season where they'd repeatedly found the bodies of small children hidden inside suitcases. Olivia Benson is the most unlikable female character on TV. She says things that are flat, too hopeful. One of the bodies is a 9-year-old girl who's had a nose job, a beauty pageant contestant. You can't out-hope that. I lose myself in the slip of my hands, greasing down my hairless skin, and imagine Playboy's mouth against E's knee, his bare teeth pulling gently at her patella. He looks up at her with his tired eyes, the whites gray with sleep. She was his wife first. The fear of monogamy is that it ends, but E had wanted it. the security, so badly she didn't want to compete anymore. I watched her give up her husband's 6-figure income to date a poet and become a sex worker in Berlin. That she could give some man a child and it wouldn't be enough terrified her. She had to trust the process and follow it through, believe by having a baby the man would see what she could do for him and how deep her commitment to securing his love could be. He was combative, but isn't every man? I thought it was something. The day he flew into Tegel, she went to see him. Every friend we had knew what he was, who his family was. They welcomed him anyway. I wondered what Mariska Hargitay would say. I didn't want to be like every other woman, sucking his dick in the hope that infamy planted itself inside them. He'd say he liked a thing, music, a hobby, a movie, and that made her want to try it more. One conflict crushes, opens another. Each word a silver tide swirling hooks through my sternum. At night, I can't sleep, and in the morning, I remember going through her phone again. I wake up groggy, and E is tense. She wants me to be vulnerable, but only in a language she can listen to. E and I take a trip around the city. The steering wheel hisses beneath her palms. The sky is more blue than I remember. I watch the sun blot shadows into the crepes of her skin. Stone monuments to the dead fence us in, and we circle looking for a place to eat. I note an empty bank parking lot. She once got into his car here. I note an apartment complex. I'd seen the same car parked there too. We turn right from a crossroads, and I see him walking down the street. My head pops off like a tire pressure gauge. He is every man wearing a black t-shirt and designer jeans. He has money, so there is no end to his wanting. E pays for our lunch, and I sulk in her impersonal conversation. My love for her is like the blunt side of an axe, and with each pound, I find new edges to the depths of my feelings. E feels a pain like yearning, but doesn't show it. She can only love a person by betraying them. She is a lover I cannot have and think about all the time. All E can think about is fucking her lover, but instead she is fucking her wife. E caresses her wife and says, "Oh yes," but she is saying it to her lover. Her wife pats her on the ass and E smirks at her, but E is smirking at her lover. Her lover waits patiently for her inside her phone. Her lover is an unbroken thought. Her lover is an empty text box, and every day her wife interrupts each new one. She must violently flesh herself into every crevice of E's existence. She/I must remind her constantly of her/my presence. I guess this is just another one of those. One long, last beg. And all E wants is one endless experience of what she loves, to exist in its flow, as one might stand beneath a waterfall, neck broken by the weight of it. Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. So this is your first short story collection, is that right?
Yes.
But a lot of these were published elsewhere. I think there's kind of like that notes thing on the back. I'm really curious, kind of thinking, I guess, just in terms of assembling all of these. Did you have like an idea of like what would go together? Did you have an idea of like, were you rewriting any of them? Was it difficult sometimes bringing in things that had been written before? Did it kind of make a sort of sense?
It was difficult because many of these pieces I'd been writing since like 2013 or 2014, which is when I'd always written, but it was when I first started seriously trying to get published. And so some of the pieces were, I would say, like a little bit raw. Like I was like, how did this get published? Like when I was reading it. And so I really wanted to like almost remaster them in a way. And I did. I tried to restructure some of them until I was happy. And some of them were just difficult because I was like, I don't know how to get this structure to work. But grouping them together was actually quite easy, I think, because I feel like I'm always writing about the same things and the same themes. And that was actually really fun, like figuring out how I could fit these together just in the various like subsections that exist in the book.
Did like the subsections come first? Did you have an idea of them before you started grouping them, or was it kind of, it was named once they were together?
I think the subsections came first. I think it was like actually both, because I knew, for example, like Yuri, like I write about women loving women, relationships and that kind of thing, or like teen girls and that sort of thing. But I think some of the others I created and was like, how can I fit this story in this subject? Just because I thought the subheading would be funny or interesting.
Yeah. I'm really interested in how you develop a narrative voice in your stories, because each of these like feels very distinct, and I think a lot of them there's almost like this stream of consciousness element to it, and you really feel like you're in like this character's voice, and they sometimes like contrast quite a bit. How do you kind of like develop that narrative voice that kind of goes through the whole story, that isn't just like dialogue? How does that kind of work?
That's a really good question. I don't necessarily know how I do that. I think it just is a combination of like when I'm walking or living my life or thinking or whatever, I just have like thoughts, and not necessarily like my own thoughts, but just series of words that I'm like, well, that sounds interesting, or that, oh, that's like really good, right? And so I just jot it down in a notes app, and sometimes I will just tend to expand on whatever comes. Sometimes if I'm writing particular scenes, I will use things like meditation or method acting exercises to think about the kind of atmosphere that I'm trying to bring about and what's required to create that atmosphere. Like my goal is always like, if there's an atmosphere in my head and it's like a scene in a movie, like you watch a really good movie and there's no words in it and you're like, that moves you somehow, my goal is like, that's in my head, and I'm like, how can I make that happen in someone else's mind?
Yeah. That method acting idea is so interesting, because that's also obviously been like such a topic these days. Like how exactly does that work?
So the exercises I've been able to find online without like spending any money on it. There are just a lot of visualization exercises you can do, and some of the visualization exercises can lead to like emotional resonance exercises, which is similar, but instead of visualizing something, it's about bringing up an event that had a particular type of emotion, and like kind of bringing every detail you can to the fore with that. And so I will take that and try to record every detail that comes up and figure out how I can translate that for a character or a narrator in a particular story.
That's so interesting. I think like reading this collection felt really interesting that you had kind of assembled a lot of them afterwards. Because like I had like a little bit of a sense of deja vu sometimes when I was reading it, that like a character seemed to be coming up again, or a situation seemed to be coming up again. Is that deliberate? Did you also kind of have that sense? Is there any sort of like overlap or movement between the stories?
Yeah, there's definitely a few linked stories, or that they live in a similar world. And there are two stories that are like explicably linked with the same characters. But maybe they all just live in similar worlds too, because they're kind of in my head too.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to talk a little bit about this kind of similar world, and I guess like this kind of literary world that you create both in this and in your novel. I feel like there are quite a lot of like recurring themes. When you were writing this or like assembling it, what were some of kind of the themes, the ideas that you think kind of define this collection?
That's a good question. I feel like this is actually the hardest question to answer. I don't know. Unlikable women. What else? Like the relationships that people have, the discordance between them. A lot of, I think, what I write about is a people or a person who's just wanting to connect and feels alienated, and all of the obstacles in between what they want and what they can have. Like desire is a huge part of it, and desire in the sense that like, you know, the root of suffering is craving, just on a very base level. Those are just topics I tend to think about a lot. after I had a baby, I was also like obsessed with death because I was so afraid, right, of it. It just becomes so much more pertinent at the time. So I was thinking about that a lot all the time. Yeah. So I think those are really big themes.
Like the main ones. This idea of unlikable women is really interesting because I feel that's something that's kind of talked about a lot, like these days. Like we had it with like Fleabag as well, right? Like that idea of like the unlikable woman. What does that mean to you? How does that kind of work?
I think it's just that, like, I was and am, maybe I'm not so tired of it anymore because I've gotten like exercise stuff. I'm like, I live in this world now. But I think I was just so tired of like clean narratives, clean stories of women that like do everything that seems right, or like girl boss culture, like all that stuff. Like I'm like a fuck up and an imperfect person, and like I can make it work. And I think I just wanted to read stories about that, about women who aren't always making like the best choices, and that it's not that big of a deal. And in fact, it's actually like incredible to experience stories like of those experiences as well. Yeah,
I think that's also quite similar to how, like, when reading you, like how you kind of write about sex and desire, is it's often not very polished. Like I think sometimes we kind of think about it, I mean obviously like in a titillating way historically, but also like we like to think about it in quite like a clean way, like that rom-com way, and that doesn't feel like that's how you write about it, I guess. Like, does that sound fair?
Yeah, I think that sounds fair. I definitely think that sounds fair. I've always wanted to make the experience of sex be very visceral in my work. And I would even say sometimes I want it to feel like that it's not even necessarily enjoyable, or it is, but it's unusual. Like I really love exploring in fiction the unusual ways that people are drawn to each other, or like eroticizing things that aren't normally eroticized, like armpits or things like that. Like I think it's interesting because humans are like sexual by nature, and it's not just a very typical like hot romance kind of thing. Yeah.
I felt like there's a lot in this book, like thinking about how intimacy functions in it. It often seems to function as a form of vulnerability, I suppose. There's a lot of the kind of sex and intimacy in this book is often in like a context of violence almost, or like potential danger, like whether that's consensual or non-consensual. Does that sound fair? Like, was that kind of that idea of vulnerability, was that something you were also kind of writing towards?
Yeah, I definitely think so, because being vulnerable means being open to another person, and that can feel really dangerous in a way. And so I think, I mean, it's all kind of inextricably linked in that way, you know? Yeah.
Do you think like the way that we're thinking about and writing about sex is kind of moving closer towards that?
I don't know. Do you think that?
I don't know. I asked this question, but I'm not sure. I guess like when I think about sort of like the literature that's coming out these days, it's a lot of that kind of Sally Rooney, Raven Leilani, like kind of thinking about women in quite like explicitly sexual, explicitly like desiring scenarios, I suppose. But then that's almost become like a trope in and of itself, right?
Yeah, that's true. That is interesting that it has become a bit of a trope. It's very popular. There's another book I haven't read yet, but I've heard great things about too, by William Fishman, I think. That's similar too, and it's good. I think the trend towards that is very exciting. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I read enough contemporary fiction to like comment. I think my publisher's just like, oh god, I'm sorry. Like, I'm literally reading Dorothy Parker right now. I'm sorry.
We can talk about Dorothy Parker a little bit. What do you like about her?
I like that I like her as a writer, that she's just like, she had to work really hard to get any recognition, and she's really funny, and I think for her time, she really pushed a lot of boundaries too. Like, probably that is the same, harkening back to the unlikable female narrator kind of trope, you know? Yeah.
Do you find that like your influences tend to be quite like diverse historically?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think to a degree. Like, I wouldn't say that I'm exceptionally, like, well-read, because I didn't go to university for English or literature or anything like that. Like, I have a journalism background.
Right.
And so I think a lot of my influences actually are probably more, like, lowbrow than high class and that kind of thing. Like, my younger, like, think about my younger influences or the people who pushed me to write. A lot of my influences also are like a lot of LGBT fiction writers, people who are writing in like the 80s and the early 90s as well. So,
Yeah, and like a lot of your stories are also like quite explicitly queer, right?
Yeah.
Like that kind of queer desire. So I want to think a little bit about like the title, Nudes. Was that you? Was that 404 Inc.? How did that one come about?
that was me.
Okay.
So when my US publisher came to me and was like, I want to put out like a short story collection, I was trying to envision what I wanted it to look like. And I actually thought, like, you know when Kim Kardashian put out that book of selfies called Selfie? I just thought that was so funny. It's actually a little bit like transgressive in a way because like it's a book with like no words. It's like just pictures and it's about herself. And I think people were just like, oh God, like I can't believe this, you know, like it just enraged a lot of people. And I just found that entertaining. And so I was like, oh, what if it was something like clever and similar in that way? And there's just something about the experience of being like a woman online where essentially like if someone hasn't like asked you for nudes yet, your DMs are really like filtered. That's good. Like that's really good. But I was just like, oh, wouldn't that be like funny? Like I just thought, wouldn't that be funny? Because so many people assume that fiction, when women write it, is like autofiction or it's like about like me, like I'm writing a diary or something like that. And I almost in a way like resent that idea because I think it assumes that like I can't have an imagination or create something from scratch. And so it was kind of just a play on the idea, right? Like a nude is like what is like the most vulnerable thing, right? Well, not the most, but it's like a vulnerable like exchange that you can have with someone. It's supposed to be like, it could be like the truth of someone because it's like their naked body. There's no fictionalizing it. Unless you use like Facetune or something, but
She can do.
yeah. So I don't know. That's really where the idea came from. Was just a play on that. Yeah.
And I guess like as well, it has like this kind of double power to it because it can be something that you give to someone, but I guess historically there's this kind of like voyeuristic idea to it as well. Like I think nudes in art history was that kind of power balance, imbalance, something that kind of you were navigating in your writing.
No, that's true. And I think maybe depending on how you look at it, right, it could be very empowering or it could even be like damaging and risky, you know, like people do, well, they have like the revenge porn thing where they like put nudes of their exes online and that kind of thing. And why is that damaging, right? Why is it damaging? Is that because society is puritanical and you could lose your job for it, right? Like that, I think, says something. So I just think the idea of a nude is fascinating, very political and dangerous.
And you've kind of mentioned like the online space a lot, which I think is because like nudes don't necessarily have to exist online, but like in our world they do. And there's like this particular story in this that is like incredible. I can't remember the title of it, but it's like is it the cat people? Cat World? Cat World one, yeah, where she's kind of pretending to be a furry online or something, essentially. And there's like a lot of kind of internet speak in it, which I thought was really, and again, like coming back to that idea of the voice. And I guess like, I'm curious what you think the relationship is, particularly in like our contemporary world, between that digital space and sexuality. Like how is that kind of unfolding?
Oh, that's like such a big question. I feel like this is a question for someone who like has an academic background.
Oh my God, no.
I think that like, I think in terms of the internet and sex, it's like a double-edged sword because I think it's really incredible that people can share and explore and have all these different avenues now to like understand themselves and figure out like what makes them tick. And I think there's never been a better time, for example, kind of for sex workers because there's a lot of like pro sex worker, pro sex positivity narrative that exists online that I think you wouldn't otherwise be exposed to. Like, there would still be a lot of stigma. There's a lot of education that can happen. So I think that is really great. But I think on the same hand, it can also be kind of dangerous. Like, I don't know. I guess it's like the internet is a tool, so it just depends on how you use it. Yeah.
Do you think it encourages like a kind of performance, I guess? Because that's something that's really interesting in the story, is that she's typing these things, but then you kind of see her and that isn't actually what she's doing, right? And that kind of sense of, are you being like your real person on the internet?
Yeah, I definitely think that, at least with the rise of social media, it can create that sense of performance in general. And social media overall, I think, has really encouraged people to think of themselves as like personal brands, which I really hate a lot, even though I work in marketing. It just is like, it's just a really awful idea. But it's also kind of become inevitable in a way. But on the same token, I almost feel like women have always had to perform or be performative somehow for approval. And so now the internet is just like yet another manifestation of that. Yeah.
That's so interesting, because that kind of happens in the book, right? That you have these performances that are in a supposedly not real space, but then a lot of these stories are dealing with like the body, like you were saying, in its like most visceral form that maybe isn't like talked about, the parts of the body that aren't talked about a lot. I'm interested in kind of how, and again, this is a really broad question, how you approach the body in your writing, because especially in these stories, it seemed to me there was like quite a lot of instability in it. Like, it keeps changing. You have like the maternal body, the pregnant body, the like anorexic, bulimic, the kind of sexual body, the desiring body. Like, it's kind of always going in flux. Like, how do you kind of approach writing about it?
So I would say that like the body is the starting point for all of my fiction, especially because that's just where I write from, is from feeling. Like, what does something feel like on the body? When I was learning how to write fiction from one of my mentors, Tom Spanbauer, that was like a phrase that he would always use, is to like, go on the body. Like, what is it like to experience it? And in a way, like, there's no better way for me to write about fiction. It feels empty without it, because the body is literally the tool we use to experience the world. So it's really important. But for me, it's always been an unstable place as well. It's like, again, I think it's probably that double-edged sword where like there's so many wonderful things that you can experience in your vessel, but it's also a place of hell, like when you're feeling trapped in it. I guess going even back to like the digital spacing, that's, I think, one thing that makes the internet almost drug-like as well, is because you can experience the world without having to experience your body in a way. So, yeah.
Yeah, that idea of it being a vessel is really like such an interesting word. Like, could you explain a little bit more what you mean by that?
Yeah, I guess the reason why I said that is because I've been thinking a lot about like Mary Shelley and Frankenstein a lot. It's one of my favorite books. And one of the things that like I have gotten from it is that I feel that, at least in the book, the female body is a vessel for grief. And so I've been thinking about like that phrase like over and over and over again. And it is like your body carries so much with it. And so that's really, I mean, that's the gist of it, really. Like, how I've been thinking about that concept.
It kind of reminds me of in Animals Eat Each Other, with like the tattoos that she keeps getting as like a kind of marker of where she's been and sort of trying to put herself back in it, almost.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So kind of, there's a lot in this as well about motherhood, and you kind of said that was like a big factor when you were writing about this, was that experience of like being a mother. And I guess like kind of, it's proximity to death, I suppose, but also it struck me there was a lot about, I guess, the narratives around motherhood that we create and the way that kind of women are within that. So it's both like a physical thing, but it's also, I think, profoundly psychological. Could you talk a little bit about how you kind of wanted to approach motherhood? Were any of these kind of ideas that you were having before before like you experienced it? Like, how did you kind of want to approach this in a new way, I guess?
I think before I became a mother, it was hard for me to conceptualize the actual like experience of it. I only had my fears. And then one thing that happened when I did finally become pregnant, and I was like obsessively researching all this information about what it's like to have a baby, and like, you know, every week I'm like, what's happening to my body? Like, why do I feel this way? Why am I going insane? Or like whatever is happening. And I was absolutely shocked by the lack of knowledge I had about my fundamental biology, that like I thought I would just know because of school or because women in my life would talk about it because they've also like, you know, been pregnant or what have you. And I don't know, that was like one thing that I wanted to explore. Like I was like, why is nobody talking about this experience? Like, why don't I know these things, you know? Or why did nobody tell me that like as soon as I had a baby I would become obsessive about death and like worry about her life constantly all the time? Why are the narratives that we learn about motherhood that why do they have to compete against each other? Like, why do stay-at-home moms fight with like working moms? Why do all these struggles exist? And I think a lot of it came from just experiencing those societal pressures. Like, it's just interesting. Like on one hand, like, when I was pregnant in the South. I was treated almost like above a first-class citizen. Everyone was so nice to me, you know? And then, like, you have a tiny baby, and then everyone's, like, so accommodating, but then, like, the baby grows up, and then really no one gives a shit anymore, and they get kind of, like, frustrated at you or what have you. And so all of those changes that occurred, like, in society were so weird, like, just fascinating. Like, I was like, I don't understand this kind of behavior or why that happens. And so that was a lot of just what I wanted to approach in exploring these stories is, you know, why does no one talk about this? Like, why does no one talk about how difficult having a newborn is, not just from the physical perspective of having the baby, but just that, like, mentally where you are is so different, you know? There's no education on it. So I just wanted to, like, explore those kinds of experiences.
Yeah, there was one line in this that like made me stare at the wall and like, oh my god. That was like, what was it saying? Something like, I'd kind of been thinking about having the baby so much, but I had never thought beyond what would happen when the baby comes.
Yeah.
Which kind of is exactly what you're saying, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me of, did you see The Lost Daughter, or did you read The Lost Daughter?
I have not yet. It's been on my list.
It's very good. I think you would like it. But it's like a lot of that kind of similar stuff about like, what are the ways that we're taught to think about mothers? And I think it feels particularly resonant, I guess, like what's going on in the States right now about expectations of women becoming mothers, but then there's no support, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And it's very much, it is such a strange thing living in the South and not being from the South, and just experiencing how much they are accommodating to the creation of life, but then politically like just don't give a shit about the social support regarding it. Yeah. Sorry for cussing.
Okay. I think it's appropriate. So kind of like thinking about like that line, that idea in particular, it kind of felt like sort of crystallizing that a lot of what this book was doing was like thinking about things that are often not spoken about. And you kind of said that as well with like almost like the body parts idea. Is that kind of what you feel your writing is doing a lot of the time? Like that kind of the things that aren't spoken, that you're giving a narrative to like the edges of things, I suppose, almost?
I think so. Like, I don't think it's necessarily my intention, or that's like, I'm not setting out to be edgy or anything, but I also do find myself intensely fascinated in things that I have never read about or never watched movies about or anything. Like, if I see that someone's not necessarily exploring something, I'm just like, why is that? And I want, I don't know, I guess I become obsessive and think about it, and then the way that I cope with that is I just like write things.
Yeah. I think that kind of idea of being edgy is really interesting because it's not edgy at all. Obviously, like you say, it is just being interested and it just not having been spoken about. But I also feel there is like a tendency to talk about this stuff as provocative a lot of the time, like anything that is sexual, and especially sexual in like non-normative ways. So I heard it a lot around when T10 came out. I don't know if you saw T10, but yeah, when that came out, like people would keep asking her about like what it was like to make a provocative film, and she was just like, please stop. Like, how do you kind of feel about that idea of provocation? Is that something you feel you're ever engaging with, or is it actually something that you feel is used to kind of potentially box people in?
That's a good question. I think I don't have any judgment on people who want to be provocative. I think that's fun, and I think there's a lot of space for that. I think it can be really entertaining. Just to challenge the taboos, just to be that person that's there that's doing it. I don't know if I necessarily ever think about audience reception though when I am writing, and I think if I did, it would be, I don't know, I guess that's hard. I do think a lot about like how it's going to be received when I'm writing it, but in a way I also like don't care, like I detach myself from it too. So I don't have any feelings one way or the other about like how I would be viewed, but if someone wants to be provocative, then I'm all for that as well. Yeah.
That idea of like the perceived audience is really interesting. Do you have like a kind of target, or no, not target, that makes it sound really marketing-y, but like a kind of imagined audience that you're sort of writing towards ever? Like, is that sort of not just like in terms of judgment, but in terms of who you think it is for?
I don't think so. I think I'm only writing towards my own satisfaction. Maybe if I'm working with an editor or mentor, like when I was working with Elizabeth Ellen a lot, then I'm thinking like, will they like this? But I think I've just been like edited so much now and like gotten so much rejection and criticism and all that stuff, which is all normal from the writing world, that I actually like only really think, does this like make me feel satisfied when I'm reading it? Yeah.
Do you tend to kind of like your writing? I'm always curious with writers because I feel that's always such a weird thing.
No, that's a really tough question. I'm actually like doing the finishing touches on a novel right now to go to publishing, and it's very tough because as I'm like making my way through it, I find myself interested and wanting to change things. Like you tweak everything as you go along, and then I tweak it and I read it aloud, and then I'm like, okay, like that's just in my head. But then like when I'm reading, there's like this sense of intuition of dissatisfaction with it, and then if that becomes too great and my mind doesn't have the energy to fix it, like as a puzzle, like in that moment, then I'm like, I hate my book, and I'm just gonna put this down and like not think about it and have bad self-esteem for a while. But I don't know if I'm ever like 100% actually satisfied.
Yeah,
I have to think about it. I don't know.
It's really hard to be though, right? Yeah. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about, so at the back of the blurb is written that this book writes across the complications of working class women rendering their desires into visceral prose, which it certainly does. And I'm curious about, I guess, that idea of class and how that kind of works in like both this and Animals Eat Each Other. How do you approach class in your writing? Is that, again, something that you're kind of consciously thinking of as you're writing?
I definitely am consciously thinking about that as a concept, partly because I really feel like I don't see enough working class narratives, especially in American fiction. And if I do see it, then it's generally like the kind of like poverty porn that exists, where it's like, this is explicitly a story about how hard someone's life is being poor, let's all feel bad for this person. And it's very celebrated in liberal circles by people who are not working class, because they get to feel better about thinking that they know what that experience is like or whatever it is. And I'm very interested in actual like working class narratives from people who are working class. Like one of my friends has written a novel about someone from the Midwest who works at a drive-through, and it's the most, to me, is like, it was so fascinating and interesting reading it, because I'm like, I've lived this life and I know what it's like to like be this poor and struggling and trying to think about how you're going to get out of it, like wanting to constantly move forward. Like there's an authenticity like to the experience, but it's not the central tenet of the story. It's the same thing even with like eating disorder narratives or queer narratives or anything like that, where it's like it doesn't have to be the central tenet of the story because people are multifaceted, and that's more interesting than like a flat narrative about someone's poverty. So I definitely was like, I want to write more about this.
Yeah.
You know,
I think, that idea of like the poverty porn thing is really interesting because I think that feels quite American. That I think over here we have, when we think about class, we often think about it in quite it isn't, but we think about it in like a white male way, or like we relate it a lot to like industry, I suppose, like a kind of industrial sort of working class. Whereas I thought what was so interesting about this is it's a lot of like retail and like hospitality and kind of people doing the jobs that now I suppose a lot of the working class do. Again, was that like quite a deliberate sort of intervention?
I don't know if necessarily like their job choices were deliberate. I think it's more just the nature of like that's just the structure of class in the States. And I also, I think there is like less, I don't want to say awareness because there's growing class consciousness, but in the media and in the mainstream, there's a lot less acknowledgement of class structure in the States.
Right.
Too. I think here it seems like people are like, we're acknowledging this. I mean, in a way. I mean, maybe I'm new, so like I don't know for sure, but it seems that there is a little more. Or for example, like when there's a general strike, like the media is talking about it because or a strike because it's actually going to affect people on a day-to-day basis. Whereas I feel like in the States, I don't think you would get the same amount of coverage because it's just harder for people to organize out there, as an example.
Yeah, and I guess like particularly in the gig economy in a lot of these places, it's a lot harder as well.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting. I think over here we have such a history of class action and of class structures, but then we then often think of them in quite outdated ways, which I suppose is like a different thing. Would you ever write a book that isn't set in the States?
Probably.
Yeah,
I think so. I don't know yet. I don't know what the next project is going to be.
I guess like I'm asking because yours feel very kind of rooted in like a very particular Americana, I suppose. But it feels like you have like a very granular awareness of it, I guess.
Yeah.
But you live in Glasgow now.
I
so
do.
Anything could happen.
Yeah. The next one that's coming out next October is definitely in the States. And the one after that probably will be, I don't know what'll happen after that.
So I want to kind of finish my questions by asking you like, what is next? What are you? So you mentioned the 2 novels. Are they're written, they're done?
Well, so the one that I'm like doing edits on now, that's called Deliver Me, and that does come out in October next year. Outside of that though, I don't know. I have like ideas, but I've really just been like editing so much. This year has been the first where I haven't like actively been creating as much. I just think just with COVID and lockdown and everything, my brain has been feeling a little burnt out. So, which is curious. I get a little nervous sometimes, like not writing so much. Like for like 2 weeks, I was like questioning my identity. Like I was like, am I ever gonna write again? Am I still a writer? I don't know.
But sometimes that's what you need to do to keep writing. Almost is to like not write for a while.
Yeah,
is what I tell myself.
I think it ebbs and flows. My friend Elizabeth, who has like a great like long prolific career, has definitely said she's like it ebbs and flows, like everything. And so I'm like, okay, I'll trust that.
Would you do another short story collection? Did you prefer kind of writing novels? Is that kind of what you've learned, or would you do another one?
I started with short stories. I started trying to figure out it with short stories. I have like a few ideas for things that I want to complete, but I don't think I've had the same impetus to do short things. Like I feel like I've really been drawn to novel ideas. But maybe one day in 8 years when I have like more material, then I'll do another one.
Circle back.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, I'm gonna open up the floor to questions. Myri, do you have a mic, or do you want this mic?
If you just holler them at the front.
Okay.
And
So like call
answer
in.
them, Elle, if you like.
So I'll just repeat.
Question in short.
Okay, cool. Okay. Who has
So
questions?
we have lots of online ones.
Amazing.
Oh, wow.
Shy and need a moment to collect their thoughts.
Do you want to start with an online one?
Sure.
That sounds good.
So the first one, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is from Lottie. Is there anything that is too taboo for you to cover, or anything that's totally uninteresting to you to explore? I love the scope of what you write.
Oh.
Okay, this is going to be a big memory test for me. I have a really bad memory. But Lottie asks, is there anything that is either too taboo for you to cover or that you wouldn't be interested in covering? And that she also loves the scope of everything you write.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I don't think there's anything that's off limits in terms of the scope of what I will write. But what is uninteresting to me? I don't know, because if I'm bored by it, I'm not thinking about it. I have to think about what doesn't excite me. I am definitely never going to write a novel about a upper middle class woman that lives in Brooklyn. Sorry to everyone in New York City. I'll never do that. Brooklyn doesn't interest me. Okay.
So Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the floor, or we can do another online one?
I can do another online one.
Yeah.
Layla asks, I love what you're saying about writing from the body. Do you have a favorite body part to start with?
So Layla asks, I love what you said about writing from the body. Do you have a favorite body part?
I always start with like the gut. Like if I'm ever thinking like, or if I'm editing other people and I'm like, this needs something visceral, I need to think about it. I always like stop and think like, what would that feel like starting from like right here, like from your center of gravity, and that's where I always start. I don't know why, but I think that's my favorite.
Do we have?
People being really shy.
People being very shy. My God. Yeah.
So just when you mentioned about the body being a vessel, I guess as you create your characters in your own body, do you find they linger, they hang around for a while? Do you feel what they feel long after they're on the page?
So this idea of the body being a vessel, and because you're creating the characters, do you find that and it's kind of like in your body, do you find that they kind of linger with you like long after you've written them?
So when I'm in the process of writing, like when I'm in a novel, it's definitely there, like lingering. I'm constantly thinking about them, almost examining like just the subject and them, or anything like just from all facets. But once I'm done with it, like once I'm like, I'm not going to edit this anymore and it's out in the world, I almost like forget. Like if you asked me a question about animals eat each other right now, it'd be really hard for me to answer just because I've been so far away from it. And I think maybe that's even why I write, is because I'm just like trying to get it out and like set it aside somehow. Yeah.
Can I ask another question? Is that okay? I'm curious whether your kind of writing comes first from the character or from the plot?
The character, definitely.
Okay. Do we have more online ones?
Another one?
Yes.
I love the juxtaposition of sex and motherhood in these stories. I feel mothers are often de-sexed. Were you consciously pushing back on this?
So Layla loves the juxtaposition of sex and mothers, and feels that mothers are often very like de-sexed. So is that something that you were consciously kind of writing back to?
Yeah, I definitely was doing that. I did feel like when I first became a mom that almost is so easy to have my whole identity subsumed by just being a mother. And I think in some ways that's because of the experience of having a newborn, but I think also it's really easy, like society doesn't help you get away from that. And so just with that experience, like when I was writing these stories, I definitely was like, I want to push back at this and say like, these are identity boundaries that mothers and women can still have and like hang on to, even though they're their mom. So.
You're all so shy.
Yeah. And stop picking on people.
Paul online is not shy. Paul has said, really interested in what you're saying about class. Do do you think there is a difference in how class reads in the UK and the US? And have you had different responses to your books in the UK and the US?
Oh, that's really interesting. So Paul, was it Paul?
Yeah.
Paul is asking about, like the way that you write about class and whether you kind of see differences across like the UK and the US, and if you find that's creating like different responses to your work.
That's a really good question. There definitely are differences that I have noticed, but in terms of how people are responding, I'm not like 100% sure yet. I think here in the UK, I have found that people actually are very interested in talking about class in my work, and they are always very curious about it, whereas in the States, they're more, I think, focused on the experiences of the women, or there's a lot more interest in the like sexual and visceral aspects of the work, I would say.
You kind of said before that you would never write like the upper middle class women in Brooklyn, which I totally get. Would you ever write like a story from a male perspective, or kind of entirely rooted in that, I suppose? Because men do obviously come up and they do have a voice, but like really centralized.
There is a story in Nudes that's written from a male perspective, but that's the only one. I don't know if I could do a whole novel. I could if I tried, but I've also never necessarily been compelled either.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to trying it, but yeah, I don't think I've just been compelled to explore it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
I'll ask you a question. You mentioned like you usually start like from the character. How do you decide, as someone that writes like between short stories and novels, is it when you're thinking about what to take forward as a novel, as a short story, is it the characters that you're most interested in, where you think there's just like more to explore that, I don't want to say deserve, because it's like to undermine like the value of a short story, but what makes you think, oh no, this belongs in a novel?
So yeah, I guess like kind of given the fact that you start writing from characters, how do you kind of know one is going to be like this character belongs in a short story, this character belongs in a novel, or not belongs, I guess, like I'm also doing it, but like that journey is in.
I think it's almost a matter of time. Like, I don't think I could successfully write a short story that spans like a couple of years or a couple of months or anything like that. Maybe I just don't have that skill set yet. But with a novel, like I have that space and that time. Like, for example, in the novel that is coming out next year, it takes place over the span of 9 months. And so I'm like, I don't know if I could compress that like skillfully enough to a short story. So that's why I wanted to explore it more. And I think for me, the short story is really just like a moment in space. It's like, you know, when you like read a poem or listen to a song and you're like, oh, that you just let the song happen, right? Like it just happens and then it's done. I think that's kind of how I view the experience of a short story, is that I just want it to be an experience that happens. Whereas a novel really is like focused intention when you're reading it. Like you have to spend some time committing to it. And like as the writer, you have to do that too. So it's kind of like, I guess I'm just thinking time-wise, it's like, what do I want to take the reader through with this moment? Do I want it to just be something that washes over them, or do I want them to earn it? And like with some books, like with novels, it's like you do want them to earn it because maybe the plot payoff at the end is like really large or whatever concept that you're trying to bring forth.
Okay, we'll go.
You mentioned that some of these stories were published originally several years ago, right? So I guess, was there anything that you learned about yourself or you were surprised by as a writer kind of putting this collection together and looking back at kind of your sort of body of work?
Yeah, so I guess because like a lot of these were published like quite a while ago, you were saying, is there anything that you've kind of like learnt about yourself or been surprised about yourself kind of going back to them?
I think early on, when I was first starting writing and publishing, before I was even like, I'm gonna do books, right? I was just trying to get published and write, like learn how to write fiction. I feel like my writing was a lot more raw, but almost in like a good way, because I spent less time thinking about it. I was just like doing it. And that was something I was surprised to think about, where I was like, oh, I've kind of lost that. Like I'm a little bit more conscious now of how I'm composing things. And I think in a way that you can like lose the fun grittiness of it when you're starting to think more and more about those kinds of things. So that was something that I did learn about myself. But it's funny because now that I'm looking back on it and I'm like, I haven't written an actual short story in like a year maybe. I'm like, I don't even know if I can write short stories anymore. Like I'm looking back on it, like maybe when I come to the page again, I'll feel a little differently. Yeah.
And then did we have,
Yeah, I was going to ask about the internet. I know it came up a wee bit, but I guess like you've been writing, publishing, engaging with the internet sort of thematically, but also in terms of like the form of your writing. And I was just wondering, how's your relationship with the internet changed in, I guess, the time that the book kind of spans, or just anything to do with your relationship to the internet?
Yeah, so I guess like about kind of the way that you write about the internet, like it's both kind of thematic, but it's also within form. And how has your relationship then to the internet changed? Because I guess 2014 internet was a very different internet. Yeah, I a better internet.
Even before that, I've always been engaging with the internet since I was like, probably 8, but we're going to say 13 because that was when I started my first live journal. Like I've always been actively engaged in talking with and expressing myself to the internet. And so almost nothing has really changed. I still do that all the time. Just how I do it has changed. Like now having a phone is like annoying. Like I hate it. I love the internet, but I hate having the phone. And I do feel like now I have to stay attached to my phone because I need it to survive. Like I need Google Maps and I use it for contact lists, and I have work and I have friends that live overseas. There's all these like reasons I tell myself why I need it. But I'm really grateful for the internet because I've always been a person that's had like online friends and online community, and I think I would be maybe I wouldn't be a big loner because I am pretty sociable. Maybe I would get out more. But I love that I have friends like everywhere. Like I feel like I could go to almost any city and have people I know there, which is incredible. But for a while, like when I was living in Arkansas, I did get a flip phone and I was like, I'm just going to try this. And I could feel my brain change for the better. I could feel like the dopamine pathway just stopped sparking as much for trying to look for notifications and that kind of thing. And that's something I miss about probably like even pre-2014 internet is that I don't like the dopamine pathway part of it. I just like the experiencing people part of it. Yeah.
Why did you get rid of the flip phone? Because that sounds great.
So part of it was just part of it was moving and that kind of thing. Like I need to know where I'm going. I need to know train schedules. Right. It's like so convenient to be able to like buy a train ticket or a bus pass on my phone. And once I had my kid and I was like traveling and stuff, I was like, oh, I can't just be like out here not knowing what I'm doing like without Google and that and that sort of thing. So if there is I'm saying this, it sounds so dumb. Like, if there's a technology that can put Google Maps on a phone but take away the applications, which means I should just delete the apps off my phone, then I would totally do that. And I actually, honestly, after, like, this publication cycle, I probably am going to take the apps just off my phone. Like, I'll have them on my laptop. There's something that's so different about it. I don't get crazy about it when it's just on my laptop. So that's probably something I'll do, because I can feel the change in my creative brain. It feels less tired, and it feels more engaged when I let myself be bored again. Like, the creative thoughts come back. So, yeah.
I turned off notifications on all my social media, and my anxiety, went right down.
It helps, yeah.
Great time. Do we have any other questions? Do we have more online?
Online?
Yes, let's go.
Is there anything you found inspiring since you moved to Scotland that might make its way into your work?
Oh, that's so cute. Is there anything that you found inspiring in Scotland since you moved here that might kind of emerge through your work?
I don't know. Every time I walk around, I'm like, I'm so happy here that I'm worried I may never write again, because I'm so happy and there's no angst. It's just so beautiful. The architecture is beautiful. The people are nice. It's green. I like the rain. When it's sunny, I notice it, and that makes me happy. The food is really good. Even your basic grocery store food the quality is incredible compared to the United States. Transportation system is great. I'm trying to think of what else. People are nice. It's all great. There's literature. There's a great literature community out here. Seems to be a lot more support for the arts, which makes me very happy. So I don't know. I don't know.
It's very nice.
Yeah.
That's so lovely to hear. It's just like a positive experience.
I can't tell you how many times I get almost overwhelmed emotionally. Like I want to cry. Like I remember the first week I got here and we bought milk and I drank the milk and it had so much depth of flavor. I almost cried. Or because of the NHS, when I went to get allergy medicine for my daughter, they were just like, "What's your address?" And I told them and I was like, "You don't need anything else?" And they were like, "No." And I was like, "Oh." I'm almost tearing up. I don't know. It's wonderful.
That's really lovely.
It's so wholesome.
Do we have any more in the room? Any more online? What time is it actually?
There's one last one.
We got time for one more, yes.
Okay. Is there anyone in the room? Because you guys get first dibs. Okay. Lottie asks, what is gag reflex?
Oh no. I gotta say this. Lottie asks, what is gag reflex?
So Gag Reflex is a novella that was also published this year that is written in the form of a live journal. So, 2005 is calling. It's an entire novel just written in that form. And it is also about a young girl's relationship with the internet. So it kind of explores that topic a lot more.
And is that out as well?
It is out, yeah.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. So that is all we have time for, folks. Will there be a signing, Myri?
Yes.
There will be a signing. Okay, and you can buy...
As long as Elle agrees.
Yeah.
Okay, there will be a signing.
I'm happy to do that.
There will be a signing. And you can buy Nudes, and it's amazing. And I think Elle's other books are also floating around. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening.